When there's a new phone announcement, if you find the camera updates to be boring, maybe you're just taking boring photos. Let's go test the iPhone 16. Most years we try to be traveling when the iPhone gets released, so our sample photos can be exciting and beautiful, but this year we're in the middle of a commercial job. Well, the iPhone was released, so the samples will be a little bit scaled back, but we'll still be going in depth on the most important features for the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro, and you're going to get a taste for what a log can look like, because this is all being shot on the iPhone 15 Pro. There used to be a time where I could basically review one camera between the iPhone and the iPhone Pro. That time is long past. Now there have been big differences for a few years now, and I really need to deep dive into each one. However, this year, they've come a lot closer together. A lot of the biggest improvements aren't specific to the camera. The processor has gotten way faster. Last year, we had a big bump for the Pro models. This year, the regular 16 gets a huge improvement, and that is going to help you out with all sorts of photography, obviously. Now, a lot of the reason for this big bump are the upcoming AI features that we can't test today, so we won't talk about them anymore for the rest of this video. We'll come back to them later in the year. But what is new is the ultra-wide now has autofocus, enabling macro mode. I've absolutely loved this on the iPhone Pro ever since it was introduced in the 13, and I'm just glad that more people will get to experience it because it's really fun, the results are very impressive, and macro photography just gives you a new perspective on the world. The main camera is 48 megapixels, giving you tons of image quality, but the features that would still attract me to the Pro iPhone models are Apple Log and Pro RAW. So let's start off with the feature that you're probably not expecting. Apple didn't even mention it in the keynote, and you're gonna find it in the settings app. We're gonna go down to camera, we're gonna open up formats and take a look at the RAW settings. There's some new stuff in here. If you open up Pro default, there's always been this ability to shoot Pro RAW up to 48 megapixels. That's great, I love it, but look how big these file sizes are. 75 megabytes for Pro RAW at 48 megapixels. That's, I mean, unsustainably big. But what's brand new are these JPEG XL options. So what I'm gonna be using all the time is JPEG XL Lossy. Ever since I started posting about these JPEG XL updates, I had a lot of questions. There's obviously a lot of confusion around it. These are absolutely still raw files in terms of full dynamic range flexibility and especially white balance. So you are able to move your colors around in post just as much. Whether you're already familiar with RAW or not, it's good to look at a few samples here. So this is a regular HEIC file that comes out of the phone. You can see it's got all the built-in sharpening. This is just using the standard profile. So that's a normal iPhone 16 Pro photo. I can also use a larger resolution HEIC. So this is all 48 megapixels. You can see up here. It's got more detail, but still all of that sharpening that I'm not in love with that comes out of the iPhone by default. I just kind of live with this most of the time. It's fine, but if we come over here to a DNG and zoom in, it strips away that over sharpening. Like the detail is there, it's the sharpening, the post sharpening that's been removed. If we go over here in Lightroom, we can see we could even turn it down further, but I think the default is about right. And looking at them side by side, you can really see the difference. All that additional sharpening is making it look like a phone photo, whereas on the RAW, it just behaves much more like a normal camera. Now let's look at a much tougher comparison. These are both RAW files, DNG. Can you spot a difference? Both of them are just using the default processing coming out of Lightroom. And it has that nice level of detail that I love about RAW photos. The sharpness is gone. But can you tell which one of these is 84 megabytes and which one is 23? One of these photos is a quarter of the size. And if you can't tell, I don't blame you. It's this one on the right. This is using the new JPEG XL Lossy format, and I've tried pushing these files around and you still have all of the flexibility that you would usually get from a RAW file, but again, it's a quarter of the size. I don't think there's any good reason not to be shooting Lossy DNG on the iPhone. And one more comparison just for fun. On the left, this is the Leica Q3, also a DNG file, and on the right is the iPhone. You can see the color response is quite different, but the detail is not that different. It's in this specific photo where there's infinite focus, they kind of pair up well next to each other. I think mostly I'd need to warm up the yellows on the iPhone, maybe bring that saturation down. And I think the Leica had a bit of cloud cover, so the lighting isn't exactly the same. But you can see just pushing things around a bit, I can get them pretty close to each other, which is amazing. But the only downside of JPEG XL, and the reason that it's not the default right now, is it doesn't have full compatibility yet. It does work in Mac OS and iOS. Going back to iOS 17, Safari does just fine in it, but Chrome doesn't right now. We really want them to pick this up because this would be a much better format than what they've been using. But if you're doing pro photography with it, most apps already do have support, especially Adobe has gotten behind it as well. Their new lossy DNG is also based on this, so you get the same space savings if you're using Lightroom. I love seeing this supported directly, and I wish my bigger cameras would shoot with JPEG XL DNGs. RAW is definitely the best image quality you can possibly get out of your phone, and now you can shoot a lot more of it, but most people still don't want to get that involved. So instead, Apple has a new solution, and that's photographic styles. They were around for a little while now, but I think didn't get too much attention because the effect was not that strong. It kind of just looked like a small white balance shift. Apple has gone way farther with this new set of photographic styles. When you dig into them, you'll find there's two flavors. One set of effectively filters that I wasn't that happy with any of them. Honestly, I'm probably not gonna end up using any of those, especially as your default. If all of your images look filtered all the time, you could come to regret it in the future. But then there's a whole other set called undertones that I think are very smartly designed. These are meant to specifically target skin tones, and Apple's doing something really smart. As long as you're shooting in HEIF, you can go back and change these photographic styles later. There's one change that I found to be the most useful, and I probably wouldn't change anything other than this. If you just look at the tone setting, slide it down to 0.5, I kind of find that's the secret sweet spot. Basically, it takes away some of that over-processing that we generally don't like about iPhone photos, where there's a bit more contrast left in the image. Whereas if you turn the tone up, it ends up looking so flat and washed out that I don't know who is going to use an increased tone. It doesn't look great to me. Turning the tone down gets us closer to something that a dedicated camera would do. Actually, there's one other photographic style I think I can recommend, and that's amber. My iPhone 15, I was using warm, turned to just 50% most of last year. And amber seems to do a pretty similar thing because I think by default, the white balance of the iPhone tends to meter things towards neutral, which is often a little more blue than I'd like. So amber, tone turned down 50%, try it out. Now let's go back to our sample photo for a second. And I'm just gonna show you, this is what the turned down tone looks like. We get a little more contrast. And here's amber, I think it improves it, but I've heard some people kind of refer to this as a way of doing RAW-like edits because more data is preserved in each photo, giving you more edit flexibility later. As I flip through these, you may notice the difference is really quite subtle. And when we go to one of the stronger filters, like this is crazy. This does not look correct anymore. It can be nicer. And I just want to show you an example. This isn't to try to pitch you my presets, but I'm just going to turn my Lightroom presets on, flip through a few of them so you can just kind of get a sense of like, this is what different looks can do to an image. And this is kind of the range I consider to be like a nice filmic response of an image. Now, one more time, this is one of the stronger looks from Apple and their more subtle look. Now, there's no right answer how to process a photo, but I would say that Apple, I would love to take a look at your next set of photographic styles before you release them, because I've got some big ideas. And while I'm on the topic, shout out to my favorite feature on the iPhone 15 Pro that is still here, and that is Apple Log, which basically I'm shooting in right now. So a little tip, if you want to be able to get log-like colors, kind of like these photographic styles that look more like a real camera, you can use either Kino, which I'm using right now, or Blackmagic Camera, and both of them have the option to bake in a LUT. But the nice thing about Kino is it has Stalman Film 03 built into it, which is a LUT that I designed. You're seeing it right now. I'm using it to shoot all of this. I don't know, it's my first time doing a like straight out of iPhone video. No color processing, it's just got a filter on it. So let me know what you think. This next feature is really useful for the kind of shooting I'm doing right now. Let's start recording on the iPhone 16, and I'm gonna go stand on this crazy, noisy, great fan thing. I don't know what's happening under me, but it's really loud. Until I make this one change. This thanks to a few new features. One is that there's new microphones in the iPhone 16, but more importantly, there's new sets of digital processing you can change afterwards. So standard is spatial audio. You can hear all around you. That's new. It was only stereo, but now if you have a Vision Pro, you can hear spatial. And now you're hearing in frame, which is everything in the frame of the video. So I'm gonna keep talking now, blah, 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 keep talking, I'm still talking. And basically it just highlights the audio that is visible inside of the frame. Now, if you have persistent noise like a fan, Studio basically tries to remove all the noise around you. Sounds very processed. Okay, I'm back in my hotel room, and here's a better demonstration of the studio mix. So you're listening to standard right now.
Now let's switch over to Studio. Now, I think this is what it's designed for. It's not going to cancel out a busy street. It's so that if you're in an uncontrolled environment talking into your iPhone like I am right now, you'll get something that sounds a little more like a podcast than a phone.
So let's listen to it again. We're back in standard. This is kind of the natural reverb of the room.
Let's switch back. This is studio mode at arm's length away from an iPhone. I think it's a pretty big improvement. And now if I was just recording on a more normal street environment, less noise, I probably use cinematic. It brings the voice forward in the mix so it's louder, but you can still hear more of the ambience around me. These are incredibly smart. They work very well.
And I think it's one of the best features that's on the iPhone 16 Pro. So one of the headline features was 4K 120 frames per second on the 16 Pro. That is really exciting, but it's not the most exciting thing about that spec. They announced those numbers because they're kind of the best for marketing. People know what 4K means. A lot of people know what 120 means, but if you don't, they're all about slow motion. You don't shoot 120 to view it like that. You always slow it down. First of all, Apple did a great job in iOS 18 of having direct controls over that, so you can decide exactly how slow it's going to be. And importantly, if you're shooting at something like 60 frames per second, you can also slow that down in the phone. That wasn't available before. But here's the upgrade that's more important than 4K. 120 now has full dynamic range. It used to really clip a lot in the highlights. You lost a lot of color information, and 120 footage never really matched up with anything else that you shot. Actually, I think the old HD footage looked more like up-res 720. It was blurrier, and the highlights really blow out. So now slow motion looks as good as anything else you shoot on the phone. Last year, all of our most successful social media content was all shot at 120, all in natural light with no control over the environment. So now you're not making a sacrifice when you go to slow motion. But if you want to shoot ProRes log at 120 frames per second, you're going to need some very fast external storage. A big headline feature this year is camera control, a dedicated button on the iPhone 16 to manage your camera. I mean, it doesn't just launch it, doesn't just take photos, it really sorts through all of the different settings you want to use. And this might be the part of the review I feel the most conflicted about. Like, I love dedicated photo and video features, anything that makes the camera easier to access, it's all great. But I have found it a little bit finicky. So when you want to just press the button and take a photo or video, launch the camera, it works great. It's a good feeling button, it actually moves, and you can tell when you're pressing it lightly or firmly, and there's a little bit of a haptic response depending what you're doing. But since today we were actually using it to shoot a job and every shot was important and other people are waiting for me and I have to get it right, I found I kept launching the other settings accidentally. And once you're inside one of those other menus, you really want to avoid touching the button again because you don't want to accidentally change something. Let's say you're on the exposure setting and you want to turn it down a little bit. Well, it's easy to overshoot -0.3 and get to -1, and now you're way under. Or if it looks just the way you want, I really don't want to touch it again and accidentally change the setting, which I did a few times, even just by squeezing my palm on the side. Like, you can change I'm doing it now. By holding the phone and squeezing, you can start changing settings that you did not mean to.
And the more I use it, the placement of the button is becoming a bit of an issue. Right now, I'm holding one iPhone with one hand, trying to take a photo with this. So if you're doing it one-handed, like, it is too far. This is like the natural curvature of my finger. If it was here, I could easily be pressing it. I've really got to like reach over. Obviously, I still can, but this would have been nice. After too many false presses, I wanted to turn off the light tap. So I went to accessibility, scroll down to camera control, and just turn off light press and swipe. Now, all it does is launch the camera and press the shutter. So at the end of the day, what does this all mean for the iPhone 16? I didn't have a lot of time to make this review, but I had tons of time to shoot with it. We were doing 3 different jobs and used the iPhone 16 Pro for all of them. This was all across Canada. We really haven't slept much for a few weeks. But I think most people don't know quite how significant the changes have been for professional creators. So first of all, the regular 16, if you just shoot photos like most people do, you just snap it and upload it as it is. The 16 is great. Image quality's there. That's kind of the way I used to review phones. It's like, are they nice snapshot cameras? But things have really changed with the Pro, and especially in terms of video. The photos are excellent. I'm really excited about this JPEG XL RAW file format. But we still don't end up reaching for our iPhones for professional photo work that often. Much more for video. Huge reasons for it, Apple Log. What they did last year, being able to record in codecs like ProRes,
in a truly cinema-friendly format, it means the iPhone can fit into all of our workflows. So we're shooting for a hotel and there's social media, but also the assets for their website, and it's going to be played on their TVs. So we need vertical and horizontal. I didn't use the iPhone for all of it, but it cuts very well, especially the wider shots, in with the bigger full frame cameras, and nobody will ever notice that it was shot on a phone. And it didn't used to be like that. Like a few years ago, we'd be like, oh, we could sneak a couple iPhone shots in, but only if they happened to work, and they usually didn't. You know, you could see the extra sharpening, you could see that it was shot on a phone. You can't tell anymore, and that's amazing. But a lot of these things were already in place with the 15 Pro. And I mean, I didn't even mention USB-C because that happened last year, but that's really significant. If you're using any iPhone that is still on Lightning, in a professional workflow, USB-C has changed the most because you can record externally and plug mics in, and the fast charging and building out rigs. I mean, there's just so much. USB-C has been really amazing for all kinds of workflow reasons. But the 4K 120 is great. I think those audio filters are useful for people that shoot entirely on their phones. So that might be more casual environments, like say TikTok creation. Whereas I think if you're doing something more professional, you'd still use an external mic like I am right now. And I already know every year I get comments like professionals don't use their iPhones. I mean, I know somebody out there is thinking it right now. And if you made it this long in the video, I was on the red carpet the other day and I was just trying to point out how many different news organizations were all shooting with iPhone. Like, it's not just me saying this. If you work in the video industry, it's iPhones out there. So any feature being added, we put to use, and I just love where it's at right now. So I could go on and on forever, and I will in the next video, which is all about what I use on my iPhone 16, the apps, the settings. If you want to know more, stay tuned for that one. I'll see you there.